Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to First Church's Homeless Ministries Uncommon Virtual Gala. Welcome to this opportunity to celebrate and support this amazing ministry, and indeed this uncommon commitment to the common good. I'm Dan Smith, Senior Minister here at First Church in Cambridge, and one of many ministers here. Friends, we have a wonderful evening in store, and though we can't be gathered in person, we hope and trust you'll feel the warmth and hospitality of this ministry from wherever you may be tuning in. There are many people who will be introduced and thanked shortly, but I need to share right from the start my gratitude on behalf of us all to two people in particular, the director of the First Church Shelter, Jim Stewart, and our Minister for Street Outreach, Reverend Kate Laser. Kate and Jim, your tireless dedication and courage these past many months of the pandemic, the impact of care and service on the most vulnerable in our midst, what you and your staff and volunteers have accomplished putting your own health and safety on the line has been extraordinary and has been a model of faithful living and moral courage for us all. Thank you, and thanks to all who have been part of our efforts, about which you will be hearing more very soon. And special thanks as well to our First Church friend, Bertrand Lawrence, for the exquisite guitar music we've just heard and for more of the same to come. Onwards.
Thank you, Dan, and good evening, friends. On behalf of First Church Homeless Ministries, thank you once more for being with us tonight. After a long, intense year of community work, we're going to take this time to look back and celebrate. And who better to celebrate with than you, our neighbors, partners, and supporters? We couldn't begin to do what we do without your participation, and we're so happy for the chance to gather and just appreciate how much we've accomplished together in the past 12 months. I also want to thank tonight's event sponsors, including Eastern Charitable Trust, Trinity Property Management, S&S Deli, and the Harvard Bookstore. We'll be sharing a complete list of sponsors a little later in the program. And warmest thanks to Tony Maws for the wonderful cooking demonstration he shared with us earlier this evening. If you haven't had a chance to enjoy it yet, be sure and watch it at a future date. First Church Homeless Ministries is a cluster of programs at First Church in Cambridge Congregational focused on providing friendship and support to neighbors going through hard times. It's demanding and deeply rewarding work, and we all find ourselves wearing a lot of hats. So see how many hats you can count this evening. Joy and fun are essential tools when you're facing down profoundly broken social systems day after day. In his book, The Tyranny of Merit, tonight's honored speaker, Michael Sandel, raises the question, what's become of the common good? Even the phrase has an almost antiquated ring to it. Yet, from our location at the edge of Cambridge Common, the very name harkens back to a more community-oriented age. First Church Homeless Ministries is here to bear witness that while the common good may be out of fashion, it's very much alive and well. Tonight, we want to tell you about the extraordinary generosity and dedication of our community amid an extraordinarily challenging year. It's a story of uncommon commitment to the common good. And we hope that as you listen, you'll be moved to become a part of that story by giving to support our work. You can do that at any point in the program by texting the number you see on your screen or by clicking the link in the program description for this video for more options. We thank you so much for your generous support. So first up tonight, we're going to hear from Don Johnson of the First Church Shelter, and then from me about the Friday Cafe, and then from Shelter Director Jim Stewart about some of the extra projects we took on this year to try to cover pandemic-related gaps. Please welcome Don Johnson, co-chair of the Shelter Oversight Committee.
Thank you, Kate, and thanks to all of you for attending this gala and for your financial support of the shelter, especially over this challenging and unnerving year. It's been quite a challenging year for the First Church Shelter, but before I share more about that, I'd like to give you a very brief description and tour. The shelter has operated for over 34 years, providing a safe, quiet, and home-like overnight space 14 homeless men located in the basement of First Church on the corner of Garden and Mason Streets. While in shelter care, our guests strive to find housing, work, health services, and any other qualities of a good life they may need to get back on their feet. The shelter has its own entrance on the Mason Street side of the church. The bunk room includes 14 individual bunks with accompanying lockers. The bath area includes 2 showers and a separate ADA-compliant bathroom. The common area includes dining and a social gathering space. The kitchen is fully equipped and accessible to the guests. If you visited the shelter in years past, it might have struck you as a quiet, out-of-the-way place. But that was before COVID turned the world upside down. Suddenly, swift, strong measures were needed to keep our guests safe, not only from being homeless and hungry, but from rampaging illness as well. Immediately, Director Jim Stewart rallied church leaders to expand shelter hours to 24 hours a day, touching off a dramatic ramp-up of additional services. New shelter staff had to be hired and trained to cover the 80 new operating hours. Most of these positions were offered to unemployed folks, providing important financial stability in a depressed job market. More meals were also needed at the shelter. Shelter Oversight Committee member Brian Funk reached out to Community Cooks, a local nonprofit, and these cooks, along with Lindsay O'Dovin and friends, have filled the calendar for months with their enthusiasm, dedication, and delicious casseroles. Around 14,000 shelter meals have been served in the past 11 months. We also needed space for greater social distancing during both the day and night, and spaces for many shelter guests who work remotely during the day. First Church and Newtown School graciously allowed the shelter to expand into some indoor play space and empty offices within the church basement. New cots, dividers, tables, and lamps were purchased and set up to meet these needs. These additional services help guests feel safe and cared for during an even greater time of uncertainty and stress. The shelter could not operate without the generosity of many people and the support of our Cambridge City and Mass State governments. We are very grateful for the dedicated and courageous work of the shelter staff during this health emergency. We are blessed that 2 guests have moved into permanent housing. We send our heartfelt gratitude to First Church members and friends for cooking and donating food and for monetary donations to the shelter. We are so grateful to local food rescue organizations, Food for Free, City of Cambridge Meals Program, and FoodLink, who supply nutritious food every week. We also give thanks for funding received from the First Church's Mission and Social Justice Committee, Citizens Energy Fund, and the Episcopal City Mission Fund. We are so happy to have connected with so many generous community neighbors and friends who donated meals, baked goods, and made financial donations. The pandemic has brought us closer together, and it's been a beautiful way to build support and meaning within our local community. Proceeds from this gala will help cover the additional costs associated with the pandemic and will contribute to needed shelter repairs. Thank you, and may you be safe and well. And now Kate will share an update about the Friday Cafe.
Well, it's been a year at the Friday Cafe. One Friday, we were doing our thing, serving a hot meal and having lively conversations around cafe tables. And the next, we were outdoors in the chilly March air, handing out meals to go. Was it that first Friday or the next that we began serving bag lunches made by Cambridge neighbors? It's kind of a blur now. We set up an online bag lunch sign-up, and it immediately filled up, and then continued filling up week after week after week, as word spread of this unique opportunity to support neighbors with no homes to quarantine in. We're at about 7,000 lunches so far, and they just keep coming. Amazing. This is what we mean at Homeless Ministries when we talk about uncommon commitment. Yes, this year has been a very stressful time for the Friday Cafe, with a lot of improvisation, a lot of tension with guests over masks and distancing, a lot of moving stuff here and there, and trying to serve 100 people a week out of a tiny meeting room at a corner of our building. It's pretty bonkers. Yet from the very first day of the pandemic, we've been showered with help. All kinds of help. Bag lunches, homemade masks, baked goods, clothing donations, blankets, on-site volunteers. In fact, we've had to turn many prospective volunteers away because we don't have room for all the people who want to help. It wouldn't be safe. That extraordinary, uncommon commitment has buoyed us up through the past 50 weeks and filled our hearts with joy. I just want to name a few examples. When the CDC began recommending mask wearing, offers of homemade masks quickly began pouring in from high school students, from Cambridge neighbors, and then neighbors from other towns. Bags and boxes of hand-sewn masks in all different fabrics, each one a simple gift of life and love from a stranger. Masks continue to be one of our most requested items. When summer came and there was no place for people living on the street to get water, we turned to the Harvard Square Business Association, and soon pallets of bottled water were arriving at our door, 2 from a generous donor, and 1 from the HSBA itself. When we realized how much misinformation about COVID-19 was circulating on the street, we asked our email list if anyone would like to put together an occasional info sheet to include in the meal bags. And the bi-weekly Friday Cafe COVID newsletter was launched. Volunteer Tim Clark packs every issue with the latest news and information, and people read it. What an important service. In October, a new volunteer showed up and quietly transformed the clothing and material aid part of our operation. Thanks to Joe's efforts and the amazing generosity of donors who have sent us a steady supply of sleeping bags, clothing, hand warmers, masks, underwear, hats, mittens, and too many other essential items to name, we are now serving significantly more needs than before the pandemic. One local artist spent his entire government stimulus check on warm jackets and vests and long johns for neighbors on the street. These resources, they mean the world to people. In October, we teamed up with the health department to offer flu shots, and in January, they came back and administered COVID vaccinations. I have no words to express my gratitude. In December, the president of Club 4, a student club at Cambridge Ringe and Latin, reached out to us to ask if they could help in any way. And we explained about our bag lunch program. The next thing we knew, Club 4 had grabbed every available spot in the sign-up, and high school students were making 60 to 80 lunches a week and having a blast doing it. You can see why we don't get burned out doing this work. And then there's our core group of volunteers, the dedicated band who show up every week and run the show at no small personal risk. You know what day Christmas fell on this year? That's right, it was on a Friday. And the entire crew was there to help out with boundless good humor and grace. A shout out to all who donated thermal socks and put together beautiful goodie bags to help make the day special for our guests. We are so grateful to live in a city where the neighbors care, where local government actively works to meet basic needs, where ordinary people reach out to us asking how they can help. I don't know of any other community where programs like ours receive that kind of energetic support. So thank you, friends, and thank you to everyone who is joining us tonight for your steadfast care in these challenging times. Year in and year out, the shelter and the Friday Cafe work hard to meet essential needs. For people living on the street, though, the pandemic brought all kinds of new survival challenges, as meal programs and other city services abruptly shut down. Here to tell us about some steps Homeless Ministries took to bridge gaps this year is Jim Stewart, director of the First Church Shelter.
Good evening, and thanks for taking an interest in the work being done by the Homeless Ministries of First Church Cambridge. For many years now, the women and men of First Church have tried to demonstrate their commitment to the gospel preached by Jesus. This gospel is not about individual knowledge or salvation, but about healing the entire creation. And it's a healing that has implications for specific people, those who are afflicted, persecuted, and deprived. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus used the words of the prophet Isaiah to explain that good news when he announced his mission. Jesus read, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has chosen me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed, and announce that the time has come when the Lord will save his people." For more than 3 decades, the shelter has been one way that the First Church community acknowledges their faithfulness to that good news. Each night since 1987, 14 homeless men have had a safe place to stay, 2 meals, and access to basic hygiene amenities. The shelter has helped those seeking assistance in securing benefits and offered guidance as they seek a more stable living situation. With the beginning of the current public health emergency, First Church Shelter entered into partnership with the City of Cambridge to expand the shelter's hours of operation from overnight to 24/7. Because the COVID pandemic necessitated the shuttering of food distribution programs throughout the city, the shelter partnered with the city to help distribute up to 120 meals 4 nights a week. COVID protocol radically reduced access to basic hygiene services to our community's poor and unhoused. Once again, acting in the name of the women and men of First Church Cambridge, the shelter agreed to assist the city in making available access to public showers on Church Street in Harvard Square. Over the past several months, the shelter has also partnered with and been inspired by Solutions at Work. The shelter has lent our experience and expertise to Solutions at Work as they have planned, opened, and are now currently operating a desperately needed shelter on Green Street in Central Square. At every step of the way, all those in leadership positions at First Church, clergy and laity, have supported the work done by the shelter. The entire First Church community has recognized the efforts undertaken during the public health emergency have been not only a challenge, but an opportunity as well. It has been an opportunity to show that the First Church community continues to seek ways to make public our commitment to sharing the good news, with all its specific implications for the poor, afflicted, and persecuted. Thank you for your support of this work.
Going through my homelessness, I find this shelter, and the first time I feel warm bed, and I find a nice, juicy lunch in the kitchen that after a long time bring some peace of home in my life. Thank you so much for everybody that helped us. And thank you special to First Church that provide all needs that we need.
Cooking for the shelter is really special because you know that the people that are there really appreciate it, and the food is made with love. And it's been great to involve friends in helping with this project. And we'll love when it's all over with the pandemic, but hopefully we can all keep cooking and feeding people and making them feel good.
It is a privilege to volunteer at the Friday Cafe for the past 4 years. The Friday Cafe offers friendly faces in addition to food and clothing. I enjoy baking desserts and preparing bag lunches. However, it is the spirit of building a community among our guests that gives me the greatest joy. And this spirit motivates me to volunteer each month.
They say that people became civilized when they learned to make tools and harness fire. I think they became civilized when they learned to boil water. It's just been a real humanizing thing to be able to take a hot shower when you want or when you need, because a lot of us went many months without a hot shower. I don't know what to say beyond that. My grandfatherly best. And that's it. It's just a game changer. It makes you feel human again.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. Our theme this year, Uncommon Commitment, recognizes the unselfish work that many of you here tonight do to help others during these difficult and unprecedented times. This year, we've decided to give an award, the 2021 Uncommon Commitment Award to such a hero. Can you guess who, during this pandemic, was constantly on the phone, calling, texting, emailing, both day and night, hardly ever sleeping, and even wore down the sidewalks between First Church and Harvard Square? This year's Uncommon Commitment Award is honoring Shelter Director Jim Stewart.
During the pandemic, Jim brought his many years of experience and long list of contacts to the service of the Cambridge homeless community. Thank you, Jim, for your call, your service, and your care for so many.
Well, none of this would have been possible. All the things that we were able to do would not have been possible without the women and men of First Church. So I'm very grateful for this recognition, and I accept it on behalf of the women and men who work at the shelter, and of course, the women and men of First Church over the years who have made it possible for this ministry to take place and for the service to be provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
So that's a bit about our year. There really has been a lot to celebrate amid all the challenges, and I hope it's left you feeling maybe just a bit more hopeful about humankind. It's certainly helped me get through these last several months. If you feel good about the kind of community-based work we're doing and you'd like to make a gift to support what we were about, you can do that by texting the number you see on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description for more options. Every gift makes a difference. And now we come to the moment I'm sure many of you have been waiting for. The conversation between our special guests Michael Sandel and Stephanie Paulsell. Having had a chance to preview these exchanges, I can tell you now you are in for a rare treat. They go deep, these two, with wisdom and perceptiveness and so much heart. This is a conversation that will stay with me for a long time and one I know I'll keep returning to. Introducing Dr. Sandel tonight will be First Church Senior Minister Dan Smith. Alex Steinert-Evoy will then introduce Dr. Paulsell. Over to you, Dan.
Friends, it is now my great privilege to introduce our speaker this evening, Professor Michael Sandel, and also to welcome our own Reverend Professor Stephanie Paulsell. Before I get to the formal bits of Professor Sandel's introduction, I need to share a quick story. Last October, in the same week that I learned that our fabulous Gala planning team had just landed on the brilliant idea to invite Professor Sandel to speak tonight, I received an email from another one of our members referring to his latest book, The Tyranny of Merit. We had been discussing another key area of First Church's ministry, our efforts to be an anti-racist church. The comment was along these lines. At First Church, it seems we like to talk about doing the work of being an anti-racist church. And here in Harvard Square, it's like we sometimes can't help ourselves from sharing or even comparing what we've read, what we've listened to, what we've learned, as if somehow getting smarter and doing that work will solve the problems. I hope we've been learning to rein in our virtue signaling ways and understand the deeper work is not about climbing some ladder of anti-racist enlightenment. It's about being human and being in relationship and being present. Indeed, it's about having a vision of the common good for us all. It's one of the things I so love about our homeless ministries, for their measure of success has nothing to do with how much someone knows or even how much someone works. Here we live in a deeper economy of grace beyond measure, where it's about how we treat each other with respect and dignity and kindness and care, an uncommon commitment to the common good. Professor Sandel's writing is already in evidence in our homeless ministries and in shaping our work of justice and love here, and we are thrilled to now welcome and introduce him. Michael Sandel teaches political philosophy at Harvard University. He has been described as the most relevant living philosopher, a rock star moralist by Newsweek, and currently the most popular professor in the world. His writings on justice, ethics, democracy, and markets have been translated into 27 languages. His legendary course, Justice, is the first Harvard course to be made freely available online and on television. It has been viewed by tens of millions of people around the world, including in China, where Sandel was named by China Newsweek, quote, the most influential foreign figure of the year. Sandel's books relate the big questions of political philosophy to the most vexing issues of our time. They include what money can't buy, the moral limits of markets, justice, what's the right thing to do, and his latest, the tyranny of merit, what's become of the common good. Professor Sandel, thank you so much for being with us. It is an honor to have you here. Over to you, Alex, to say more about our wonderful moderator.
Good evening. In a recent sermon titled, What's Next?, Stephanie Paulsell focused on the theme of immediacy and how people in the Bible acted immediately upon being asked. And, as she does so masterfully, she then turned to our contemporary situation and pointed to the Biden-Harris administration and pointed out how they, too, are acting immediately. Then came the magic of her gifts, how she beckons to her listeners and compels us to move and act immediately. Like the true pastor, teacher, model she is, Stephanie tells us that we must act immediately, but we must not worry about acting perfectly. She points out that what is next is going to be heavy work, and as such, she reminds us that we must delight in working together with one another to bring about a vision of a world transformed. This is the way Professor, Dr., Reverend, Interim Pusey Minister in the Memorial Church, Susan Shallcross Schwartz, Professor of the Practice of Christian Studies, Stephanie Paulsell, speaks, and the way she lives out what she speaks. To learn from Stephanie, whether by reading a book she has authored, taking a course with her, listening to a sermon, attending a faith and life session at First Church, or just by simply being in her presence, is such a gift. We at the Homeless Ministries of First Church are more than honored to have her with us to speak with Professor Michael Sandel. As her sermon's title asks, what next? Stephanie does have an answer of sorts, and so I leave you with her words to mull over. We cannot see the future, but we can seed it with practices of hope that might grow to new ways of living. Thank you, Stephanie, for being with us this evening.
Well, welcome everyone to this conversation with Professor Michael Sandel. Professor Sandel is the Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Professor of Government at Harvard University, where he's well known as a political philosopher who teaches a very famous class called Justice that fills Sanders Theater whenever we are teaching in person. But he has been writing and thinking about our common life for a very long time. And his new book, The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good, is the subject of our discussion today. My name is Stephanie Paulsell. I'm on the faculty of the Divinity School at Harvard, and I'm a member here at First Church in Cambridge. So welcome, Michael. It's so nice to have you with us.
It's great to be with you, Stephanie. It's an honor to be with you, especially to have this conversation be in celebration of the Homeless Ministries.
Yes, we're really so glad to have you for this important milestone in the history of our community. And your book has a lot to say about community and about the problems facing us as a society. For me, this was a really powerful reading experience because you really shine a light on some ideas that I think we've begun to take for granted in our politics and that are just getting kind of hardwired into us. And you've asked us to step back and ask whether we're really achieving what we hope we're achieving through ideas of meritocracy, equality of opportunity, and so on. So I'd like to begin there We're so used to hearing meritocratic ideas expressed by our leaders, really liberal leaders, conservative leaders, and you show in your book that since Reagan, the language around merit has increased with each presidential administration. Under President Obama, we heard a lot about equality of opportunity, how everyone deserves to have a chance to rise. And now under President Biden, we're hearing very much the same language. So I'd like to ask you, what's the problem with this language? We've understood it. I think our American politics have understood it as a way to address the persistent problem of inequality in our society. But in your book, you're arguing that these ideas are often corrosive of our attempts to combat inequality, and in fact, simply reallocate the inequality. So what is the problem with the meritocratic ideal?
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. The meritocratic ideal, we should begin by acknowledging, is very attractive in some respects. Removing barriers to achievement and success is a good thing. Encouraging people to go to university, that's a good thing. It's even better to broaden access for those who can't afford it. And yet, conceiving the primary political response to the deepening inequalities of recent decades by telling people who worry about wage stagnation and job loss that the solution to your problems is to get a university degree, then you too will be able to compete and win in the global economy, as the politicians tell us. That is a woefully inadequate response to the deepening inequality that a market-driven version of globalization over 4 decades has brought about. That's the heart of it. But there's a further aspect to this. It's not only inadequate, the rhetoric of rising, as I call it, is not only inadequate in dealing with the structural inequalities of income and wealth and power that have deepened in recent decades. It also contains a kind of insult that many well-intentioned political figures and political parties, including those on the center left, have missed, have been tone deaf to. The insult is this: if the solution to inequality is to tell people, go get a college education, what you earn will depend on what you learn. You can make it if you try. These are slogans drawn from recent presidents, including some of our best. As that promise and offer is reiterated to the point of mantra, it does carry a certain insult, because for a great many people in our society, because if you haven't gotten a college degree, and if you're struggling in the new economy, the implication is your failure is your fault. And this goes back to what you were saying about how it really begins in the Reagan administration, when great emphasis was placed on individual responsibility. And like merit, individual responsibility is a good thing, a healthy thing up to a point, to encourage people to be empowered, to feel a sense of agency, that they can shape their lives. That's a good thing up to a point. But it's quite another thing to suggest that we are the masters of our fate to such an extent that where we land in our society is our own doing. And this really is at the heart of the problem, I think, Stephanie, because in recent decades, the divide between winners and losers has been deepening. It's poisoned our politics and driven us apart. It has partly to do with the inequalities, but more than that, I think it has to do with changing attitudes toward success, toward winning and losing. Those of us who have landed on top have come to believe that our success is our own doing. the measure of our merit, and that those who fall short, those who struggle, have no one to blame but themselves. So this is the dark side of meritocracy. It creates meritocratic hubris, as they call it, among the winners, and demoralization, even humiliation, among those who are left behind. And I think this juxtaposition of hubris among elites and humiliation among those who feel that their work and their contributions are no longer acknowledged and honored and respected. This gap creates mounting anger and resentment and grievances that are the stuff of authoritarian populist appeal, the source of Trump's appeal in the United States, of authoritarian hyper-nationalist appeals to grievance by a great many parties and political figures in Europe. That's the dark side of meritocracy that I'm trying to identify and connect to the polarization that we experience today, Stephanie.
I'm wondering if there's as you said at the beginning, it's easy to understand why we would turn to these ideas. We want equality of opportunity. We want, with the persistence of racism and white supremacy in our country, the opening of opportunity is, will just, it will just change. I think it will just open, we'll have so many more people in our meritocracy, so to speak. And I'm wondering if there is a place for meritocracy within a just society, some sort of modified meritocracy, or is this always just such a dangerous idea, so corrosive of human solidarity that we shouldn't work with it at all?
The idea I think we should save and rescue and affirm that is closely connected to meritocracy is the idea of trying, though we've got a long way to go, to overcome racism, prejudice, everything that holds people back due to the accidents of birth or circumstances of class or race or ethnicity or gender. That is a project that any just society must pursue. The mistake is to connect that project of removing barriers to success and achievement and respect with the further claim, the meritocratic claim, that insofar as we succeed in that, everyone up to a truly fair starting point, then the winners will deserve their winnings.
Right.
That's where a kind of overcoming of discrimination and racism and prejudice and disadvantage slides into the meritocratic idea of desert that leads to hubris among the successful. Now, it's not easy, and this I think is the force of your question, it's not easy to separate the two.
Right.
Because many times, in many ways, in our public discourse and in academic discourse and in legal arguments, we assume that the project of making equality of opportunity more real, more true, rather than merely formal, is connected to the idea of being able to take pride as having earned and as having deserved our winnings. It's hard to detach those two ideas. I think is a reason it's important to recognize that even fulfilling the promise of equality of opportunity would not in itself bring about a just society. It's a necessary condition, but it's a remedial project in a way. It's remedial. It's not achieving it does not by itself achieve a just society, nor does it achieve a good society. because that whether it achieves a good society depends on whether it can be achieved without generating the hubristic attitudes toward success and toward deservingness that so often have accompanied it, especially in recent decades. And because once it slides into that hubris, the dark side of meritocracy asserts itself, and meritocracy fuels a way of thinking about society that divides winners and losers. And once we have this picture of society, if only the winners could deserve to win, and by implication, the losers deserve to lose, then we would have a just society. No, I don't think so. And there are lots of reasons to doubt that would be a just society, but it's clear that it's corrosive of the common good. Because the more I think of my success as my due, the harder it is to imagine myself in other people's shoes. Whereas a greater appreciation of the role of luck in life can prompt a certain humility there, but for the accident of birth, or the grace of God, or the mystery of faith, go I. This spirit of humility is a civic virtue we need now. We have precious little resources of humility in our public life and in our moral culture. And all of the pressures toward meritocratic notions of success and striving and rising work against the cultivation of this sensibility, the sense of humility that can open us to a sense of obligation to everyone in our society, however credentialed or however successful in material terms they may be.
It makes me think a little bit of Virginia Woolf's book, Three Guineas, which was her anti-fascist tract she wrote in the 30s, where she's talking about barriers to success, barriers to participation in the professions, in religion, the universities, by women and minorities of all kinds in England. And she argues for a society of outsiders that will come along and will examine all these institutions. And because they've been outsiders, because they've been on the margins, they'll have a different notion of how to, she said, maybe maybe they'll create a new religion. Maybe it will be based on the New Testament, but it will look very different than the one we have now. And so I don't know, I wonder if she would make an argument that enough meritocracy to let new people in who have not been participating before might lead to some new vision of how we organize ourselves, or perhaps meritocracy is just so seductive that we get caught up into that, that you've talked about the dangers of just getting caught up in that notion of we deserve what we have because we worked hard for it, which inevitably means that those who aren't succeeding also deserve where they are, which is the thing that is so corrosive of our solidarity with each other.
I love the way, Stephanie, you've framed this suggestion or possible implication of Virginia Woolf's way of conceiving this, the outsider's point of view. What it suggests to me is that the project of broadening the inclusiveness of our society, I think we often misdescribe its purpose and point. Its purpose and point should not be to perfect the meritocracy. Its purpose and point should be to pursue the common good, to create a shared way of life in which all of us live richer, better lives for the opportunity to engage with and come to know, sometimes to contend with, those with whom we disagree, those who come from backgrounds different from ourselves. But this project of inclusion, I think, we misdescribe if we say it's about letting everyone compete fairly to climber up the ladder of success. That's the meritocratic construal of the project of inclusion. I would rather redescribe the project of inclusion. And the passage from Virginia Woolf is suggestive of this, I think, as a way of creating a common life, a life where there is not just equality of opportunity, but a broad democratic equality of condition, where people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, encounter one another in common places and public spaces, and sometimes learn from one another, sometimes bump up against one another in contentious ways. But this is how we learn to negotiate and abide our differences. And this is how we come to care for the common good. And part of the problem with the meritocracy is that it's not really about bringing about a broad democratic equality of condition with class mixing institutions. It's about broadening the circle of people who can clamber up the ladder of success, but this project overlooks that the rungs on the ladder may be growing further and further apart. So the project of enabling people to clamber up the ladder of success and calling that a response to inequality misses the common good and creates attitudes towards success and meritocratic competition at odds with the project of solidarity that you've described.
Yeah, I guess we won't just suddenly wake up one day and know how to do this. We're going to need some practices that help us learn how to live this way. We're going to need some, as you said, some public spaces where we can encounter each other and practice being together. How do you imagine those public spaces and practices? What do we need to learn how to do?
Well, for one thing, we have to reinvigorate and enrich civil society as a seedbed for public spaces of this kind. Coming together in a homeless ministry is one important way of creating such sites and occasions. So are faith communities, churches, synagogues, mosques, and other forms of communion. So are labor unions of a certain kind, especially where they're concerned with promulgating a kind of civic education that empowers workers in addition to negotiating fair wages and working conditions. One of my favorite examples from the early labor movement is the Knights of Labor, the most important labor movement in the late 19th century. Beyond pressing for better wages and shorter working hours, one of their demands was reading rooms in factories so that workers on their breaks could read newspapers and magazines and journals and inform themselves about public affairs and equip themselves to be effective participants in democratic life and to have a voice. These are the kinds of public places and common spaces that have atrophied and that we need to reimagine, from religious communities to unions to schools, universities, public libraries, community colleges. These can all be sites of civic education. I think part of the problem is it's as if we have sequestered civic education in the citadel of higher education and then conducted a tournament, a meritocratic tournament about who gets access to it. Yeah. I see no reason why civic education should be the sole province of universities. I think that it should take place, including reflections on moral and political philosophy, as well as current affairs, should take place in community colleges, in job training and vocational training centers, as well as in work settings and faith communities, to say nothing of the role of the media, which I think has to do a better job, has to be remade really, so that it can provide fora for a civic learning and civic deliberation of a kind that's painfully absent from the kind of media that we experience today.
That was the promise of the internet, right? But is the internet helping us at all, or no? Or
I think the internet can be an arena for creating platforms for public discourse within small communities, and for that matter, global public discourse. The internet can be a platform for teaching and learning and for civic education. So I think there is still promise in the internet. The problem is that the giant social media companies that dominate the landscape and that distort and corrupt our public discourse, these are massive. These are defined not so much by their technology as by their business model, which essentially is to collect our personal data, to use an algorithm to sort and slice and dice our personal data, to feed us often sensationalist, eye-catching news feeds and opinions to attract our attention and commandeer our attention for what? For the sake of selling us stuff. That's the business model. And that's the problem. So I think we have to attack that fundamental business model. We should not allow businesses that deploy algorithms to gather our data, command our attention, to sell us stuff. That is a recipe for the divisive, corrupt, insulated communication, information, and civic discourse, if you can call it that, that we have today. But the internet, if it's deliberately created and structured and developed to promote a healthier platform for civic discourse, is still possible. The problem is not technology. The problem is us. It's a problem of political will and political imagination, and it's really a challenge about whether we want democracy to flourish.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up the ministry at First Church, because I do think the Friday Cafe and the First Church Shelter are these kinds of spaces where lots of different kinds of people do encounter each other. It reminds me of Dorothy Day and Peter Morin's vision for the Catholic worker movement, that in the houses on Friday nights, people would gather for what they called roundtables for clarification of thought. And workers and students and guests of the house and all different kinds of people from around would come and talk together about the urgent issues of the day and try to puzzle together their way towards solutions. And everyone had a voice and everyone brought their perspective. And your book points out, and you've been very eloquent on this here as well, that we have precious few of these spaces where we encounter each other across differences, all kinds of differences, and that religious communities might be one of the places where that could be reinvigorated.
Yes.
We have a few questions from our guests that I'd like to pose to you before we close. One, I think you've answered in many ways already, but this is from Mike, one of our guests in the shelter, who has studied your analysis and your argument and agrees with you on the corrosiveness of these meritocratic ideas. But he says, how do we fix it? How do we find a way forward? And you've given us some good answers to that question, but I thought I would just pose it one more time and see if there was anything else you would like to add.
Right. Well, just to try to fill out a response to Mike's question, I think part of the response is that we need deliberately to try to renew and rejuvenate these sites of civic engagement and of class mixing settings in public spaces. And so we've talked some about that. The other element, the other part of my response to Mike's question is, I think we need to change the terms of public discourse. I think that we should focus less on arming people for meritocratic competition and focus more on affirming and renewing the dignity of work. We often assume that the money people make is the measure of their contribution to the common good, but this is a mistake. We can think of lots of examples of people whom this economy, whom the labor market rewards lavishly, whose contributions to the real economy are tenuous at best. And on the other hand, people who work long and hard, whether in paid or unpaid forms of work, in the workplace, in the household, in the community, who make enormously valuable contributions to the common good. So I think we need to question the assumption, which is so deeply embedded, that the labor market offers anything like an accurate verdict on the question of what counts as a truly valuable contribution to the common good. We have outsourced our moral judgment about contribution and the value of contribution to the market. We need to reclaim it for democratic citizenship and put right at the center of our politics the question of what really counts as a valuable contribution to the common good, and how might we reconfigure the economy the better to recognize that. If I could just give one example from the experience we've all been through with this pandemic, I think this could be an opening, because those of us with the luxury of working from home can't help but notice during this pandemic how deeply we rely on workers we often overlook. Not only those in hospitals caring for COVID patients, but I'm thinking of delivery workers, warehouse workers, grocery store clerks, home healthcare providers, childcare workers. These are not the best paid or the most honored workers in our society, but now we are calling them essential workers. So this could be the moment for a broader public debate about how to bring their pay and recognition into better alignment with the importance of the work they do. Now, whether we'll seize this opportunity, that's an open question. That's very much up to us. But it is an opening for a shift in the public discourse that would go in the direction that Mike's question rightly asks about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we have one more question. This is from Tom, who's a guest on our Friday Cafe. And this is a really interesting question. He says, in the course of his career, a sewage worker might prevent more disease than a surgeon ever cures. So should a sewage worker be paid more than the surgeon?
I think it's a powerful and actually quite deep philosophical question. And to Tom, I would say, well, we should at least consider it seriously. There's a powerful precedent to Tom's observation that comes from Martin Luther King Jr. In 1968, shortly before he was assassinated. He was speaking, you remember, to a group of striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. And he said to them that the person who picks up your garbage is, in the final analysis, as important as the physician. Because if he doesn't do his work,
That's right.
diseases are rampant. And then King said, all labor has dignity. So King came to a thought very similar to Tom's, that, and this connects with what I was suggesting earlier about challenging the assumption that the money people make is a true measure of the value of their contribution. Once we open that question, that assumption, for discussion and debate, we're very close to the suggestion of Tom. But in any case, I think we are on the way to a path that I think would be very important in moving us beyond the polarized kind of public life we have today toward a morally more robust kind of public discourse than the kind to which we're accustomed, including one that addresses big questions about values, about what makes for a just society, about what we owe one another as citizens, and about what really constitutes the common good. That would be a more generous, less polarized, less rancorous politics than we have today. And these are the questions. This is the reframing that it seems to me would at least help make this a possibility.
Well, I see we have run out of our time, but I'm so grateful to you for this rich discussion, and thank you for your answers to these questions. I think human dignity and the dignity of work is exactly where is a good place to end up. I wonder if we could end, though, with just to have you talk for a moment about one of my favorite parts of this book, which is your reading of Job, the story of Job, who, of course, has all these terrible things happen to him, and he wants to know what he did to deserve it.
Right.
And God gives this very mysterious answer. But the way that you read it made that answer seem even more expansive than I have felt in the past.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity, Stephanie. The book of Job, I mean, here is Job. He's a good man. He doesn't realize he's being toyed with, really, as part of a cosmic wager. And he can't understand the reason for his suffering. And here he's lost his family. He's a good man. He's suffering. Not only he, but also his friends, if you can call them friends, who are mourning with him the death of his family members. They're saying to him, surely you must have done something to deserve this fate. What could it be? Search your soul. What could it be? They're asking Job. And if this reinforces his suffering, that here the victim is being blamed and being asked to account for why he deserves this. So those harsh trends, they are relentlessly meritocratic.
Yeah.
They assume that the cosmos is meritocratically ordered, that whatever fate befalls us must be our own doing, must be something we deserve, something that is the result of what we have done. It's the relentless meritocracy that plagues Job. And then a God arrives and speaks to Job from the whirlwind, and he says, actually, you've got it wrong. You've got it wrong. I haven't arranged the cosmos in this way. It's not meritocratically organized. Everything that I do is not for the sake of rewarding virtue and punishing sin. I'm not only responding to human activity. I have a cosmos to worry about. I've got bigger fish to fry, so to speak. It rains even over the oceans where there are no crops. So he tells Job to accept the mystery of things, and to relinquish the idea that everything that befalls us is the result of our own merit or our own sin. It doesn't work this way. And so I think God's message here is trying to educate Job and us away from this way of thinking, this deeply human-centric and in a way hubristic picture that everything that happens in the universe is either a reward or a punishment for what we have done, what we have brought upon ourselves. The universe is more mysterious and vaster than that, and appreciate the mystery and have a certain humility in the face of it. This can ease the hold, can loosen the grip of this confining and, in Job's case, harsh meritocratic assumption. And I think recalling ourselves to this humility, appreciating the role of luck, and even the mystery of who winds up where, can chasten our impulse to meritocratic hubris and open us to a more generous attitude to those less fortunate than ourselves, Stephanie.
Well, Michael, we thank you so much for opening our imaginations and helping us look at our political language, our scriptures, our communities, our life together in a fresh way.
Thank you.
We're very grateful to you for being with us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thank you again for the privilege of being even a small part of this celebration of the homeless ministries and the importance of the work of the ministries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A powerful vision of a transformed society. Michael Sandel, Stephanie Paulsell, your reflections have been a gift to everyone listening. We can't thank you enough for sharing so deeply of your wisdom and insight today. Thanks also to our event sponsor, the Harvard Bookstore. If you haven't had a chance to read The Tyranny of Merit yet and are thinking about ordering a copy, Harvard Bookstore will make a generous donation to homeless ministries for every copy sold at harvard.com/Sandel. They may even have some signed copies left. I bet they do. Well, we've been uplifted with stories of generosity and challenged with visions of social renewal. It's time to take a few minutes to get down to what the older generation would call brass tacks. Why did they call it that? I looked it up. No one knows. Maybe Tom Hathaway can explain.
Hi friends, it is my great honor this evening to be the one who gets to announce that, as of this moment, First Church Homeless Ministries has all the money that it needs, not just to sustain, but to grow our programming in the coming year. I know, that is some pretty exciting news, and that is completely true. Just one small caveat, and I think you'll agree it's no big thing. It's true that we do indeed have all the money that we need, not just to sustain, but to grow our programming in the coming year. It's just that money is currently in your pockets and not ours. But don't you worry, I'm here to help you do something about that. If you're handy with a cell phone, you can pick yours up right now and fire up a text message to 844-996-0982. In the body of that message, just type a dollar amount. For example, $50 or $500 or $5,000. Hey, you do you. Then just type the word homeless and hit the send button, and you'll be prompted to enter your credit card information. However, I know that there are some of you out there who are wanting to make a donation so very large that your thumb cramps up at the very thought of having to type it out on your little cell phone. Don't you worry either, because we take thumb fatigue very seriously in these parts. You can access our online giving portal using the link in the video description below, where you can donate from the safety and the comfort of your computer keyboard. In all seriousness though, friends, First Church Homeless Ministries could not do its important work of caring for some of the most vulnerable members of our community without your support. Now, more than ever, every gift matters, and every gift makes a difference.
Don Johnson is joining me at the podium for the next part of our program, a subject dear to the hearts of all of us at Homeless Ministries, and that is appreciations. Happily, Don and I share a quarantine bubble, so we don't have to follow that 6-foot rule.
As you've heard tonight, the strength of our program comes from the generous help and uncommon commitment of members of our community. We have so many people to thank.
The City of Cambridge, our close partner, with a special shout out to Councillor Mark McGovern for his tireless advocacy on behalf of unhoused residents.
Food for Free, Food Link, and Community Cooks, our longtime food partners, and all of you who have kept the shelter supplied with home-cooked meals during the pandemic.
Bag lunch makers by the hundreds, including the students of Club 4 at Cambridge Ringe and Latin High School.
Mask makers and clothing donors, and all of you who have ordered essential supplies like sleeping bags, hats, and gloves.
The Cambridge Public Health Department for working with us to get guests and frontline staff vaccinated in January.
And so many others. Here are just a few of the people and organizations who have helped us thrive in the past year.
Before we close, I'd like to say a few words of thanks to all who have helped create tonight's event. Thanks first to Tony Moz for the delightful cooking video we aired earlier this evening. Utmost gratitude to Michael Sandel and Stephanie Paulsell for that unforgettable conversation about merit and the roots of human solidarity. Thank you to our sponsor, Harvard Bookstore, our musician, Bertrand Laurence, members of the Gala planning team, and the amazing Tom Hathaway, our graphic designer, videographer, and editor extraordinaire. Most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for making time to join us tonight. Your presence means the world to us. Information about how to get more involved in our work can be found on our website, and there's a link to that page in the program notes for this video. We are so grateful for your support. Also, please join us on Zoom if you care to, for an informal reception in 15 minutes so that we can meet you and thank you in person. Funny hats are optional, but they're not discouraged. You'll find the Zoom link in the program notes. We close tonight with more images from our work from this past year, accompanied by the beautiful music of Bertrand Laurence. Again, thank you so much for joining us.